Adrian Hall will explore the underlying issues that are the real barriers to effective ICT development in rural Africa and discover potential solutions to bridge the digital divide. Adrian Hall has spent over 20 years supporting technology companies entering the African market. Through his company RigbyHall, he connects businesses with the most relevant solutions by leveraging his extensive network and partnership with the high-tech park in Abu Dhabi. His expertise spans various sectors, and his focus on digitization is driving innovation and economic growth across Africa. And what are the most pressing challenges hindering broader ICT adoption and development in Africa?
I mean, there are three main issues. One is connectivity, one is affordability, and the other is relevance. So in the context of connectivity, when you look at rural areas, when you have relatively small villages, relatively unconnected areas, the challenge is one of economics. So it's costly to install infrastructure for telecommunications and ICT. When you look at Africa, over 60% of Africans live in rural areas. And in some countries like Burundi, Rwanda, South Sudan, Malawi, over 80% of the population live in rural areas.
Impressive.
So deciding where you put that connectivity into a village is challenging. Which villages do you connect when it's costly to do so in the first place? And the return on investments are low. Initially, when you connect remote areas, your return on investment is going to be low, because those people don't use technology, and it takes a while for them to start using it and for them to increase their usage, for them to receive the benefits that come from an increased usage of ICT, where they can increase their income through work, and they can improve their lives through education and healthcare, etc. So it takes a while. If you're an operator and your objective is to provide shareholder value, where are you going to put your investment? This is a conversation I've had many times with operators and with regulators, is where do you put your investment? As an operator, you've got an objective to provide shareholder value. You do have a social and economic objective where you need to connect communities where the value of ICT would perhaps be even higher than in urban areas. But you've got to balance that. And like I said, with so much of the continent being in rural areas, you've got to decide where it should go first and where it can develop. So the challenges that we have, where to make that investment, the challenges are also beyond connectivity. The other challenges are affordability. And affordability feeds into the connectivity question, because the initial price of putting in connectivity into a rural area is high, because you've got to outlay infrastructure. So therefore your service will be expensive in those areas. Those two things are tied closely together, and they cause a challenge for people to have access. The third and probably the biggest area where there is a challenge in connectivity, and why people are not adopting connectivity in those areas, is relevance. So there's over 2,000 languages in Africa and many more dialects, and customizing solutions to be delivered in every language is almost impossible. If we're being honest about it, it would be very difficult for technology companies to develop solutions in 2,000 languages.
What is the statistics of people speaking English there?
So in most countries, people speak a level of English or French or Portuguese, are the main European languages, but there's also a lot of local dialects. The more you go into the rural areas, the less people speak English or French or Portuguese. So it's more local dialects. And then there's the issue of literacy as well. They might be able to speak, but they can't read. So some technologies require reading on, websites. You need to read them. But also there's digital literacy as well, which is another issue. So being able to use devices is another challenge. Having access to those devices is also a challenge. When you combine all of these things, there's a number of reasons why people are not connected yet. But there's a lot of good work happening, a lot of NGOs, a lot of regulatory efforts in terms of developing community Wi-Fi, digital literacy trainings, education. There's a lot happening, but there's a lot still to happen. And you've got to bear in mind the size of the continent of Africa is massive. So where those efforts are directed means that other areas are not getting that attention. And so it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity as well.
Let's put all this knowledge into practice with our next question. Imagining you're advising a rural village in Africa with limited internet access. Briefly outline 2 low-cost creative solutions they could implement to improve connectivity within their community.
That's a good question, but the question is slightly flawed in one way. So the connectivity within the village is not the challenge. There's a number of ways you can set up connectivity in a village that can be relatively easily done at a cheap cost. The main cost center comes with connecting that village to the backbone networks or to the core infrastructure of the mobile operators, plugging it in to the World Wide Web. In isolation, a village with Wi-Fi connectivity is one thing, but it's the connection to the outside world that is where the challenge comes, because that's the expensive part. And you need the infrastructure providers who are willing to make those investments. Otherwise, that village is going to have a connectivity for itself and it doesn't do anything. The interesting thing is you have universal service funds coming under the regulatory authorities in most cases, which receive money as a small percentage of mobile operators and fixed line operators' revenues. Those universal service funds are specifically focused on providing opportunities for connecting those rural areas. So they will develop things like Wi-Fi, community Wi-Fi projects, for instance, which are great. I've also seen, just recently had a conversation with a company providing backbone networks in Nigeria. And there are specific companies that will focus on develop the rural networks. And they'll do that by working on a revenue share with the mobile network operators. Mobile network operators and fixed line providers need to focus on their core networks, their main sources of revenue, but they can work with smaller companies, localized, who want to develop private networks for their location, their villages, if you like, in the remote areas. That collaboration where the smaller operators who are, for them, a small revenue is a valuable thing, whereas to the mobile network operator, it's not as valuable as making investment in their core network infrastructure. Partnerships, collaborations, that's the way that problem will be solved. The universal service funds provide a good medium for managing those connections and supporting those, as do the regulators themselves, in encouraging the rural connectivity piece. But it should be about enabling it as well as enforcing it. By enabling it, you get more of a buy-in from the different stakeholders. There are different technologies around providing access to rural areas, which are lower cost. They don't require the same tower infrastructure, for instance. They can use solar energy instead of diesel infrastructure and generators. And there's also a new technology coming into the marketplace now, being seen a little bit more prevalent, and that is satellite direct to device. And by providing a satellite service direct to a device, there's no need for infrastructure on the ground. Infrastructure in the air, but that's going to be there anyway. And by that being there and providing beams to the ground, they can cover the most remote areas with connectivity, because everybody within the beam will be able to access as long as they've got a device. And I think that's going to be a real game changer. Things like TV white space as well, being utilized in some countries, which is the spectrum that was being used by analog television, now being freed up. That provides a way to get connectivity over a long distance at a relatively cheap infrastructure model. There are solutions coming down the line. They take their time, but there are opportunities there.
Nice to hear that. What advice would you give to companies or organizations looking to invest in or partner with Africa's growing ICT sector?
Another good question, Tatiana. Thank you for that. And actually, it's what I do with the company that I have, RigbyHall, is we help companies to do business in Africa. And what we did to enable that, well, firstly, I had 20 years of experience of building connections across the continent. And I know a lot of the people that I need to speak to. Also, by organizing events, I've become very familiar with the industry, with the ecosystem, with the marketplace. And you need to, as a company looking to do business in Africa, understand the market, not understand the continent, because the continent is not the market. Even the countries themselves within the continent are not the market. You have to take localization to a much more granular level to really understand the needs of your clients. And also the nature of your clients. I know from working across Africa that people in different parts of the continent have different natures, and you can't approach every one of them with the same mindset and the same personality. You've got to adapt to the person you're speaking to. You've got to understand what the needs are, and you've got to be patient. You've got to be persistent. And, you know, it's trust at the end of the day that will close deals. So you need to build trust, and you need to build strong relations with the right people in the market.
Adrian, thank you so much for sharing all this information. I think there's so many aspects to consider when we speak about African market, and you actually managed to uncover the important bits which we need to actually understand and accumulate when we speak about African market. Thank you very much again.
My pleasure, Tatiana. Thank you for inviting me.